whiskeys to share share and sample. That's not the whiskey talking. That's just me being tired on a Sunday night.
Mark Graben and Jamie Flinchball are two guys drinking whiskey while chatting about lean ideas, experiences, and news. Let's hope they hold their liquor because they're not holding back on sharing their opinions. It's time for Lean Whiskey, Lean Talk with a fun spirit.
Hello and welcome. This is Jamie Flinchball here with Mark Graben for episode 7 of Lean Whiskey Podcast. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jamie?
Wonderful.
Good. Good to have a chance to do this again with you. These are always a lot of fun. We got some. I've already poured my whiskey. Have you?
I have poured it, yes, and ready to start some more tasting. So
yeah,
it's a Sunday evening and a great way to sort of cap off the weekend and roll into the week.
Yeah. So sometimes, we get the ball rolling, talk about, what was going on over the weekend. I think we decided we're going to talk shop a little bit, just get the ball rolling. Jamie, what's something that you've worked on recently that was new and interesting to you?
Well, new and interesting almost always involves me putting my toes into a pool I haven't been in. And so recently, I one of the boards of directors I serve on, I would always ask questions about cybersecurity and how well protected we are and what's our countermeasures. And so we decided, as is now popular and I think important, to start a cybersecurity subcommittee for the board, which I'm now leading. Mm-hmm. And I'm not inherently qualified for that, except for the fact that I'm just going to dig in, roll up my sleeves, be inquisitive, and then we pull some of the folks from inside the company and outside the company into the process. So I'm really enjoying learning more about that from a process standpoint, technology standpoint, and really, if you talk about a lot of companies always having to improve to stay ahead of the competition, well, it's a different kind of competition, but this is certainly an area where it certainly is continuous effort.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, you don't need to be an expert on cybersecurity, but even when you said talking about countermeasures, I wonder if this is one of these areas where it's tempting for organizations. I'm sure all sorts of companies are throwing solutions at them, and it would be tempting to go with some trendy solution without stepping back and having the discipline to say, hey, what is this really a countermeasure to an important problem or situation, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, it's understanding the wide variety of risks, what they are relative to your company, and then what is being done on both sides of the equation. I think the thing that really woke me up to this was, not a lot of it is reported. It's reported when consumer data is stolen, but there's so much more that goes on that's never really makes the news. And I had one as a speech being given by a cybersecurity expert who used to be on the other side as a hacker. And he said, if your CIO says you've never been hacked, you should fire them right now.
they just don't know.
No, he was saying, everybody has been at some level. It might not always be severe. It's certainly not always newsworthy, but, it's you just can't stay that well protected. So he's saying you have somebody that isn't facing the music. So it is about control, and it's about minimizing damage as much as it is about preventing anything from ever happening.
Yeah. That comment of the CIO, I'll paraphrase the Toyota-ism that I think will be familiar to a lot of listeners. No hacking is a problem instead of no problems is a problem.
Yeah, that's a good corollary.
My apologies to Toyota for that.
Well, I'm sure they're working on the problem just as much, because they have consumer data and they have product data, and that's pretty valuable to a lot of people. So
yeah. Well, then there's the future of connected cars potentially being hacked.
Yeah, and we've already seen. I remember the first videos were of, I think, Jeeps. Being hacked from cars from behind, and really, again, it's about isolating control and isolating the problems and making sure that the control is still in the right hands of important outcomes. So I have a feeling that we'll always be battling that, but I think that we being, the industrial community at large, taking the threat seriously and working diligently and deliberately to thwart as much of the risk as possible.
Yeah, that's important. Really important stuff.
So what have you been new and interesting on your plate?
Well, so the last couple of months, I've been 2 weeks a month at an ambulatory surgery center that's part of a larger health system. So I've done a little bit of OR work, but this is the first time I've been in a kind of a dedicated standalone outpatient surgery center. And this was the first project where, this is the first project where in this setting, the way to blend in, working with frontline staff, being at the Gemba, and they're like, you should just wear scrubs every day. So that was new for me. I've worn scrubs occasionally, but it was starting, this is the first time it's been a regular thing. I had to get comfortable being that comfortable, to be honest.
Well, yeah, we talk about business casual and we don't wear ties anymore, and scrubs are just a step above pajamas. So it is, but it is, you are the value added staff for a large part. If you're in scrubs, that's where the real work is done. And I'm sure when you're not in scrubs in a hospital, you're either, administration or you're a patient. So,
or a consultant.
Or a consultant, right? So it's sure this is a much better way to get close to the work and even be trusted by folks who are always going to be skeptical of outsiders.
Yeah. And, the first couple levels of management there generally wear scrubs every day. But a lot of hospitals have not gotten the business casual memo yet. So right. The new process and the planning I had to come up with was, the hospital would let me borrow scrubs and I'd have an inventory of a couple pants and a couple tops and put them in the laundry there and grab some new ones. But I did have to have rather formal business clothes, suit and tie, if right. we were over at the main hospital to go meet with leaders who are in suits and ties. So it was kind of this weird back and forth. I'm normally fine with business casual there in the middle between suit and tie and scrubs. Yeah.
Yeah, it is an environment where, the appearance is important, and, everyone, it is fundamentally an environment where that needs to be trusted, right, by their patients, by regulators, by others. And so whatever, in all sorts of ways, we try to send signals that we are trustworthy in the healthcare sector. So I'm sure that there's some legitimacy behind the code and probably some old habits as well.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see studies and data, as much as the people in healthcare say, hey, show me studies and data. It could be habit. I did ask a hospital CFO once because I got to know him well enough and we're chatting. I'm like, so many other industries, even banking in a lot of cases, has gone away from suits and ties. And his response was, well, the patients expect us to dress this way. I don't know if that's really patient focused, other than there's a habit that patients expect you to dress this way. Like
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. It might be true, but maybe it's just easier not to question that one. So,
yeah, but that was a good project. It didn't drive me to drink per se, but I am enjoying this whiskey just because. So do you want to switch into whiskey talk?
Yeah, let's switch into whiskey talk. The first word of our title. I think we've had some interesting selections. I'll be curious if we get to episode 30 or 50 and what kind of themes we'll end up with for our whiskey selection.
The theme might be, here's something we haven't had yet.
Yeah, here's the last bottle left on the shelf. So this week we've always tried to introduce each other to different stuff when we go out. We'll usually not just order the same old stuff. Well, you've especially introduced me to some stuff and said, well, let's go someplace and try this. So we thought we'd try the same thing. And so we created some samples for each other out of our collections and did some sharing. And we've unfortunately already tasted most of that set, but we have at least one dram left for each. So we're each going to try something for the first time that we've selected for each other. And I did select something that I thought for sure you haven't had because it was brand new to me. And maybe not even easy.
You were correct in this guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I was correct. That's good. And this comes as a couple of the selections so far have for me from my Bounty Hunter Whiskey Club, a Whiskey of the Quarter Club. It's a great way to be introduced to new whiskeys. Not a sponsor of the podcast, but they're pretty close to maybe where they should be. So this was one that I found really surprising. It's a Canadian whiskey. It's called Pendleton's Director's Reserve 20-year blended Canadian whiskey. And Canadian whiskey is one that the only time I probably would have Canadian whiskey is if I was at someone else's house and it's all they had and that's what they poured me. But I can't say I would ever really order it. Just not in my horizon of what I'm looking for. And this was an interesting, kind of backstory just around what Pendleton does. And, this is blended and they do their own stuff that they select from other stuff as they blend. It comes in a leather pouch. The whole bottle comes in a leather pouch and a great presentation, I will say. And when I tasted it, I was pretty surprised at how good. By no means it's the favorite thing I've ever had, but it was by far the best thing I've ever had as a Canadian whiskey. So that's what I selected for you. So I think you've already tasted it, but what do you think?
I have. I'm having a couple sips of it here. So I'm with you. No offense to any Canadian friends who are listening. I generally don't drink Canadian whiskey. Like if I'm in Canada, try to be polite when I'm there. Like I try to drink local. And so I have tried Canadian whiskey, but it's just not generally in my wheelhouse. This is, it's 40% alcohol by volume. It's a fairly light whiskey, sort of like a light Scotch might be. It's got, to me, it's fairly sweet. I'm not the best at pulling out flavors, but it seems kind of orangey, and the tasting notes say there's aromas of orange peel. There's a lot of vanilla. So, it's fine, but it's just, like I said, it's just not going to be my go-to. But interesting to try. That's not a free advertisement for Pendleton. Sorry.
Excellent.
Yeah. So not every whiskey is for every person, right? What was that?
I was just saying, what did you select for me?
So when I selected for Jamie, and I'm going to have to start putting together a little quick spreadsheet summary of what we've had now that we're into episode 7. So what I shared with Jamie is actually what I drank in episode 1. So this is a Texas whiskey, which to some might sound as, like out of your wheelhouse as Canadian whiskey. It's a Texas straight bourbon whiskey from Garrison Brothers. And this is a release called Balmoral. It's named after a state park with a big big pond, lake kind of thing. And the clinking, sorry, I hope that wasn't too loud. There's a metal, there's a metal star on the front of the bottle, and there is a metal medallion hanging around the neck because it was named the American Micro Whiskey of the Year 2019 by Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible. So this is probably at the other end of the spectrum from a Canadian whiskey. This is 57.5% alcohol. So I'm curious, for one, what you think of it, Jamie, and then secondly, like if you add this type of whiskey, you could add some water to and see how it changes.
Yeah, and I haven't done that yet. I only have one pour, so I have to be careful.
Yeah.
But I will say from the start, the color is fantastic. It's right up there with the Glens Creek bourbon OCD that we've talked about before. It's rich auburn color. So far, really been enjoying this. I pick up, and I'm not very good at tasting notes either, but I pick up some leather and some tobacco. It's got that, good kind of earthy, like I said, leathery kind of taste. That good chewing whiskey. It is, I will say, you can feel the heat. The high proof. If you have to be careful with this one because it might catch you certainly on the back end. So I feel that heat. So I add a little water just to see if it changes it much.
And while you're doing that, I right up front there's a lot of leather, and then all the sweetness, kind of caramel butterscotch type sweetness kicks in, and like for me, for the proof, it doesn't have as much burn, but maybe that's because I've had too much whiskey. Not tonight, but
and honestly, I didn't know, so I just wasn't expecting the heat.
Yeah.
But I pick up the sweetness, and for me, it's more like a molasses sweetness. But again, sort of in that good chewy category. But this is a good sipper, right? I mean, this isn't something you use to make mixed drinks with. This is a good sipping bourbon that I could pour a good 2-finger pour and take my time with and really enjoy. So I know Garrison's a longtime favorite of yours. And I know you've talked about it before. You certainly keep going back to it, so it hasn't.
Yeah, and literally going back there. So I think the day this will get released, Friday, September 14th, I'll actually be down in Hye, Texas, HYE, Texas, west of Austin, and I'll be there Friday and Saturday for an annual event that my wife and I do called Bourbon Camp. And it is as awesome as something called Bourbon Camp might sound.
Right.
But I'm holding, I've got the two side by side, and the Pendleton's is sort of a light beer type color, yellow color. And the Garrison Brothers, like you said, it's a reddish brown. So, it's interesting to see they're all whiskeys, and they're all part of the whiskey family.
And it's part of the fun is exploration. So,
yeah.
Well, let's move on to the other word in our title and cover some of the lean stuff. So, we're still going back to in the news. That always seems to be fun as we react to stuff that we read. So we have sort of an interesting article this time about bringing lean home. And it's actually an article from the New York Times titled "The Surprising Benefits of Relentlessly Auditing Your Life."
Sounds riveting, right?
Sounds riveting, right? So I don't remember even how I ended up on this article, but I think somebody recommended it to me. And so here's the opening quote is, "My husband had been trying to sell me on this method for years before I finally relented. An efficiency consultant who had once worked in the car industry in Japan, he wanted to Toyota way our lives. I wanted him to keep his spreadsheets to himself." So that sort of sets up the tone, and this is a very sort of first person experience with this.
Yeah,
where they definitely go back and talk about what they gain. I think the second and third reaction suggests something different than this first reaction, which is really the closest reaction I've gotten. Is you can keep that to yourself, but I think my first reaction is why. right? So
why lean at home?
Why lean at home, right? So there is a, when you're trying to run a business that has lots of people in it and has a purpose and it's trying to deliver product or service to people, and it needs to be as waste free as possible so that you can invest that money in providing more value and solve the problems of what gets in the way and deliver that value to the customer. And all that sounds great, but why are those things important at home? Is it, of course, if it feels comfortable to you, that's fine. But if it's more work to do versus the benefit, who cares if there's a little waste in your life? So my first reaction, not that I'm against it, is just because you're a lean person doesn't, whether you're a consultant or an expert inside a company or just someone who passionately applies it.
Right.
Why do you need to bring it home?
It comes back to that question from earlier of it's a countermeasure to what problem?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot to react to and unpack here. One thing that's just jumped out at me as you were reading it, and I was rereading the introduction, and the subheadline says, "We tend to think that good marriages and happy families are born of love and care, not spreadsheets. But what if that's wrong?" So a couple of things jump out. One is, what's to assume Toyota or a lean company is not also born of love and care, love for patients, caring for employees. So it's puzzling, this kind of the fixation on, lean as spreadsheets. And then the other thing that made me cringe, because it's a pet peeve soapbox issue, is her calling her husband an efficiency consultant. And I'm like, well, why not also a quality consultant? Or when people want to equate lean and Toyota with just ruthless efficiency of some variety.
Well, and always there's a couple possibilities that pop in my mind. One of which is that what editors do to articles after people write them to make them clear to themselves, attempt to make them clearer or more interesting to the reader. You never know what's original and what's not. But the other is, this could be a person who calls themselves an efficiency consultant, or that is what they focus on, because there are plenty of people applying lean only to productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be a very accurate quote. And the spreadsheets could also be that. I've certainly seen, I don't want to say plenty, but a few lean consultants and lean practitioners who love their spreadsheets. There's nothing wrong with spreadsheets; they're a tool to do a job,
right?
But it's not the centerpiece of what we believe as lean is all about.
Her husband could be an engineer or an accountant, right? People
absolutely
love spreadsheets,
right?
But they talk about data, and I have nothing against spreadsheets. Data can be incredibly helpful, especially in workplaces as related to Kaizen and continuous improvement. So she mentions Kaizen, but the author says she and her husband, quote, decided to collect data on everything. Which I'm like, well, it's again, I think lean is not just about collecting data, and this is lean whiskey. I don't want to make it too lean risque, but I'm like, well, I have data on everything. I might draw the line somewhere.
You might, and I know a guy who was very good at setting goals and collecting basic core data, and would measure everything from how many nights of travel he was away from home to how many glasses of wine, or at least wine nights, I think he called them, to to dates with his wife. And I do think, I would say that this is that, in general, most people, and this is a fairly accurate statement, are likely to overestimate the things that they should be doing and underestimate the things that they shouldn't. Meaning that, if I say two nice things a week to my wife, I might believe I'm saying twice, just because we tend to overestimate the positive things that we're doing. a little reality. It's you can imagine certain relationships blowing up to you never do this and you always do that, and a little data might dampen some of those
Yeah.
conjectures.
I don't know if I'm going to respond to my wife as data driven. She's an engineer and an executive and as data driven as anybody, but I don't know if, well, show me the data. It's going to be a great reaction.
Probably not the right response at that point, right? And I do think this wasn't, as you read this article, it wasn't a response to a fight. At that point,
yeah,
I'm not sure data is really going to even help you, but it seemed proactive and a bit purposeful, just to dampen my earlier point. It sounded like they did try to apply it in a purposeful way. But I will say, my wife's an artist. She's an architect by training and practice for many years. She's been more focused on family and kids and lots and lots of volunteer work since. But show me the data and even just an interest of, boy, our kitchen could be more efficient if we laid it out differently and did 5S. And again, going back to purpose, which it all goes back to, is it's not a disbelief that it would be more efficient. It's not being interested in being more efficient in the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think when we talk more about kitchens, I like to cook but thinking about data, I wear a Fitbit, and I mean, I do look at exercise data, not just how often am I exercising, but maybe the quality of the exercise. I gather sleep data. I don't know if I'm sleeping more or sleeping better. So I think there's that question of a lot of times we have these automated methods for collecting data. It doesn't mean we necessarily turn it into improvement. That happens in workplaces. But, I think there was another line from the article I thought was interesting, where she said the spreadsheet sparked more honest conversations than we'd had in years. And so that goes beyond the data, where I think, in a workplace, if we've got data and numbers at the surgery center, the main number we were asked to look at was patient satisfaction scores. And there's the scores, but then there are the quality, the kind of the free-form comments that patients can put in. And, the data, and even more so the comments, sparked conversations about things that could be improved. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of the story.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm not sure how much data is really needed just to again spark a conversation and explore cause and effect and so on. In the end, most data, and this is true of data in the workplace as well, doesn't tell you always why. It might tell you if there's a problem. It might tell you where a problem is, but it usually doesn't uncover the why. And this is one of the challenges, is that at home, the whys can be more complicated than they sometimes are in the workplace.
Yeah.
But still, conversation is there. And I'm a bit overreaching here, because by no means am I, sociologist or anthropologist studying generations and patterns. But there does seem to be in today's Instagram world and Facebook world, plenty of families or marriages that care more whether they appear a good marriage than they actually care about being one. And that's where I think this can be dangerous. Now, if that's what you want, if you worry about that appearance, how many date nights and how many this and that we do, how many trips do we take that we post to Instagram? If that's what you're on about anyway, then fine. The data will help you get there, I guess. So again, it's still, like everything, comes back to what problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to accomplish? What's your purpose?
Yeah, and I mean, it makes me think there may be some companies that are more interested in winning some sort of lean prize than they are of actually being better as a company. So there's even before Instagram. I think there are some companies that have been fixated on the perception of their lean journey. And, sometimes like you said, with people and Instagram, possible to put kind of a false front on things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, 5S is famous for that, right? Being tour ready and looking really good. And I talk to a lot of companies about the purpose of their lean journey itself. And as we talk about the approach, we'll lay out an approach and say, this is not an approach designed to get you to a point where somebody writes a book about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is designed to get you to where you said you wanted to go. Which is a whole different objective. If you want a book written about your lean journey, then you're going to have to do a whole lot of different stuff, because that's sometimes a different blend, or certainly a different purpose.
Yeah. There's another element to the story. I think beyond 5S and spreadsheets, coming back to problem solving, and obviously, this is maybe 1,000-word op-ed piece, but there's a point where the author says she told her husband, quote, "I think you should quit your job. We should sell our house and we should move somewhere cheaper. I told my husband matter-of-factly one day, so we did." And I'm like, well, did they manage that whole discussion with an A3? She was proposing countermeasures, and I'm sure there's a deeper backstory to how she reached that conclusion. But those are all pretty big changes. So, it also makes me wonder, well, gosh, what is it even possible to do small tests of change? Or that seemed like kind of a rip the Band-Aid off, make some big changes all at once series of changes she was proposing.
It does, although I will say I told my husband, so we did. Sounds more like a regular marriage, and there's nothing lean about it. So.
Or some old school workplaces, but again, we don't know the whole story.
No, we don't.
Maybe they had gone through an A3 and built alignment, and they both reached that conclusion together.
Very possibly. We may never know. And so of course, the easy example, and I've seen, I've had clients and other people I've worked with, and they put RACI charts up on their walls. They build process maps sometimes, but the most common, sure, is 5S'ing at home. Whether it's the kids stuff, I've seen some great, 5S'ing of the kids' playroom and where everything goes so that it's back. Certainly the kitchen and stuff like that. There's a famous Toast video which highlights some of the opportunities. But have you ever done 5S at home?
If you mean putting tape outlines around things, no. But, I think it all comes back to what problem are you trying to solve and what matters to you. So in our book, Healthcare Kaizen, Joe Schwartz and I have a chapter at the end of the book about people who were inspired to do Kaizen-style improvements at home. And there were a lot of examples from people at his organization where somebody was inspired by the problem of getting the kids out the door on time in the morning, and so you could say they 5S'd some of the kids' backpack and where supplies and things needed to get out the door on time were lined up very methodically. That's great. So the closest, I do try to use principles though of putting items close to the point of use, like tools that I use all the time should be closer. At one point in a previous house, I was embarrassed to realize that the knives were like a couple steps away from where I kept the cutting boards and where I did the chopping. So one day, finally, it occurred to me, well, I should swap the drawers. And now at this house, I've learned from this, the house I'm at now, the knives are in a drawer in the island that's directly above the door that opens for me to grab the cutting board. So I've tried to have efficiency and kitchen gadgets that we don't use as often can go in a closet in a spare room. But no, I've frankly never been tempted to really get the label maker out and label cabinets and put tape outlines around things. I wouldn't hold anything against somebody who chooses to do that because they find that helpful. What about you?
Yeah, so I always look at what are the mechanisms that's going to keep it in place, and so there's no audit that's going to work. There's no real repercussions. So I do some 5S'ing of my spaces, my office. End up, just because I often get up very early, have a separate bathroom downstairs, which I can keep my way, and a little section of my garage. But that's about it. And that's where I know where everything is. My space, I don't really have a lot of labels, but I do have plenty of structure behind how it's organized in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the shared spaces, I just learn how to operate in the shared space, because efficiency isn't the primary objective. And so there's a lot of things that I know there's one shelf where you find all the sauces, unless it's spaghetti sauce, because that's stored where the pasta is. And
yeah,
I've learned that never made sense to me, but at least now I know what the answer is and I can find it. But I think I've learned, not through great experimentation, that it's just not a good cost benefit to bring it at home. I think it all depends on your relationship, your spouse, and what you're trying to accomplish with it.
Yeah. But when you talk about shared spaces, I think whether it's at home or in a workplace, something that's a personal space like your own desk doesn't require the level of 5S formality and discipline as shared spaces, right? So I think of, like, in a hospital, a quote unquote nurses station that's used by nurses and techs and doctors and others and people on different shifts. And well, it's not your space. So there's something to be said for being a good teammate and helping keep things consistent for the benefit of others. But I think there's a different level of formality. Like, say, if you want to look at Kanban systems, I've got a number of household items that are on, in a way, a two-bin Kanban system. The Costco packs of toilet paper, paper towels, kitchen trash bags under the sink, dishwasher soap tablets, shaving cream, things like that. These items are relatively cheap and they don't take up much space, and I don't ever want to run out. So my informal two-bin Kanban system, which doesn't require cards or barcodes, is like, when one is empty, like not immediately, but the next time we're at the store, that's going to go on the list that we maintain. And I can do that without tape outlines and formal cards. I find that helpful.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the two-bin system. As long as your inventory is not too expensive, it's not easy to do with cars or kids, I've found, either. But the beauty of the two-bin Kanban system is, as long as your replenishment cycle is less than one use, you just rotate and flip as you consume. So it's I'd have to say I certainly have several of my consumables on a cadence where the replenishment cycle and the buffer Kanban inventory is matched up properly.
Yeah. I don't have Kanban cards for my whiskey bottles.
No, but that's if you only had one type of whiskey, then that would probably be appropriate. But when it's about exploring, certainly having a bunch of half full bottles is not the most efficient way to consume whiskey and minimize your floor space. But
minimizing oxidation of open bottles. But
sure.
See, this is lean whiskey. We go back and forth pretty seamlessly, right?
Yes.
But, I think, again, part of me says, to each their own. There's somebody I know who posts a lot of stuff on Twitter and YouTube about using lean practices at home. And I think it's great that he does that. I think it's great that he shares it. But there was one Kaizen, or you can call it 5S thing, he shared this idea, and I've heard it from others, is, put some empty trash bags down in the bottom of your kitchen trash container, because then they're right there when you need them. And the comment that stood out, he said something like, well, why wouldn't you do this? And my answer is, the place I store the trash bags is like literally 3 feet from the trash can. It's not that big a deal.
Mine are in the next cabinet over, and we do that too, not systematically, right? But it's a nice little simple hack, and you take your garbage bag out. There's one right there, and it's more often than not than there is. But what's the cost? Right?
Well, I think there's some risk of, let's say, the garbage bag gets a hole and it leaks and there's a mess, and now you've got a bunch of dirty and something. There's some risk. Is it a big deal? No, but
and again, coming back. So if the problem you're trying to solve is you take the garbage out in the morning on your way to work and you never want variation on your arrival to work, well, that makes an awful lot of sense, right? And there's no variation because you have all the things you do on your way out the door systematized. So I think, again, are you looking lean? Are you trying to look lean? Are you doing stuff that solves real problems? Yeah. And just be sensible with your application, and and if it's fun for you, then that's a good enough reason. Go have fun, right? Yeah. Do all sorts of experiments.
Yeah. So when you talk about, is it helpful? And coming back maybe one more time to the New York Times article, I think there's a question of sustainment where the author, she wrote, we stopped the project after a year or so, but started again last month. I'm like, well, this sounds like a lot of lean trees where there's enthusiasm and then somehow people get tired of it and they stop doing the things that they said were helpful, which is kind of puzzling.
Yeah. And of course, if as the article said, that the data led to better conversations, and then that would make a lot of sense that that's what they were doing. And it led to more conversations. As long as they don't move again back to a closer, more expensive neighborhood and reverse all their previous decisions, then I say more power to them.
Well, maybe their marriage had moved pretty close to a state of perfection. Maybe they had no more need for Kaizen, and then new challenges popped up, so they needed this process again.
Very possible, and I appreciate them sharing very, very openly. It's I imagine it's not easy to write about your marriage in a newspaper with quite the circulation, because lots of people will read that, but I appreciate them sharing their own story and their own exploration, and I hope it continues to go well, as it sounds like it has for them.
Yeah. Well, and then I hadn't clicked in the comments section, even in a highfalutin place like the New York Times can be a cesspool. And here's the first comment. So it said, I'm glad this helped you, but does it really take a spreadsheet to be able to tell your husband he's a spoiled, whiny baby about missing kicking back with his friends while you're spending 14 hours a day on housework and chores? First, does it take a spreadsheet for him to hear you? So I'm like, that's the risk of writing anything publicly, and I'm going to close the comments.
Yeah. I just, I generally don't read a lot of comments in public articles like that. And I see here there's 261 of them, which is an awful lot. And I'm sure plenty of trolling in here that isn't helpful at all. But if nothing else, if it inspired some folks to think more deliberately about how they want to live their lives, whether they want to go one way or the other, then that's fantastic, and it did its job as an article.
Yeah, and beyond an article, you're talking about people sharing. There's a book, and it was actually made into a movie that people might know. And I'm curious if you've seen the original, like it's a black and white movie, Cheaper by the Dozen, Jamie?
Yeah, I have not. And it's one of those many movies that I have in the back of my mind that I should see. And I seem to be waiting for them to come out on Amazon Prime or see it on an airplane, which is not infrequent. So it's on my list of when convenient, I'll probably try and catch the movie, but I haven't seen it.
It's corny, but I mean, the story behind it, and I've read good chunks. Maybe I even got through the whole book. But it's the story of Frank Gilbreth and Lillian Gilbreth, who are arguably two of the innovators of the whole field of industrial engineering. And so, I think they literally had 12 kids, and the book and the movie go through how, this, at the time, they would have been called efficiency experts, the both of them, trying to manage their lives and their household. The Steve Martin version of The Cheaper by the Dozen was really about a guy who had 12 kids. Like, he was a football coach. It's a total bastardization of the original story.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one either, although Steve Martin's certainly worth giving it a shot as well.
I think it was more entertaining, the Steve Martin one.
Sure.
It shared a title and a premise of life would be crazy with 12 kids, right? No offense to anyone with 12 kids.
So, for our listeners, if you've applied lean at home, we'd love to hear your examples. Maybe on a future podcast or blog post, we'll share some of them. But we'd certainly love to hear, what's worked or even what hasn't. Always interested in the how far we can take this grand experiment.
Yeah, so you can email either of us. My email address is just mark@markgraven.com. Jamie's is...
Mine's at jamie@jflinch.com.
Jamie leaned out his website name a couple of years ago, right?
If most people are calling me anyway, then kept it pretty simple and even shortened my name, because who needs 11 letters for 2 syllables?
And another thing, if you want to email us, you can send us listener questions, which we've generally addressed each time. Today, I propose that we actually talk about a question that was posed by Josh Howell on the Lean Enterprise Institute's Lean Post website, and we'll link to this in the show notes. Josh has a background. When I first met Josh, he was involved with Lean at Starbucks. He's been a coach at LEI for a couple of years and was fairly recently named the new president of LEI. And he posed a question in a post: what's the current state of the lean management movement? I got drawn in. I commented. Hopefully that wasn't part of a cesspool of online comments. But one of the things I said, we can elaborate on this maybe, is that it's really hard to generalize. I mean, if we're going to draw the boundaries that broadly, if we were to say what's the current state of lean at a certain company, that might even have a lot of variation. But Jamie, let me put you on the spot first. I mean, if you had to generalize, or would you even generalize, what's the current state of the lean management movement?
Yeah, so I do think it is very difficult, because I think there's people that have probably not only not done it, but taken it the wrong way, and people who have taken it well beyond what Toyota ever intended. So I think there's such a spread. But what I see when I hear lean management, what I see so many people want to jump is to lean leadership, and they want to talk about executives and leaders leading people and changing culture. And I certainly talk about that a lot myself, but I call it lean leadership, right? So it's very popular, but it's also it's ill-defined. It's not clear what lean leadership is versus, in particular, what lean management is. And I think it's because we like the word leadership over management. It's sexier.
Yeah.
And lean management's boring, but management is essential, right? It's managing resources, allocating resources. It's controlling the environment, providing stability, execution on a regular basis. I mean, there's a lot to what management is that is important. So I hate definitions where management's bad, leadership's good.
Yeah.
Different things, and they're both either done well or done poorly. So to me, the lean management movement is actually pretty immature. I think there were practices introduced that supported lean management, and even some of the key tools like leader standard work, which I think should usually be called manager standard work, are the few pieces that have remained the essence of what that is. And we really haven't taken it very far. So I think lean management is still very, very fresh, and I don't see it accelerating very fast either.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, it's really hard to step back and look at the bigger picture. Over time, I get less concerned about broader movements, and I become more concerned about what are we doing at this organization. Like that's something you can actually wrap your arms around. And the ambulatory surgery center, that I mentioned earlier, we were trying to get our arms around one aspect of a problem at one small part of a large organization. But it's hard to generalize. There are hospitals doing really great work with lean, if you're going to call that part of a lean management movement. And then there's still, to me, a discouraging number of hospitals who get in the cost-cutting mode and will literally lay off their entire lean or process improvement or continuous improvement or performance excellence or whatever the heck they're calling it. They'll lay them all off in the name of, well, we need to cut costs. So that's the downside of this quote unquote movement. It's not all positive.
No, it certainly isn't. And I think you're right about what's going on at any one company. I think there's probably some stuff out there that's as good as it's going to get. And there's stuff out there that's as awful as it's going to get. And so it really is not where the movement is. It's where each company is, because that's where the application, that's where ground zero is for the application, and where we ultimately need to focus. But I think what hurts companies sometimes, again, is not just the poor definitions of lean, as lean efficiency, as we talked about in the news article, yeah. Or is it quality, or is it delivering value, or is what is it? Then how do you manage it if you can't even define it?
Right.
And so I think therein lies part of the problem, where lean management of what version of lean are we managing within has as much to do whether lean management is good or poor as the practices that we would call lean management. So again, the overall strategy, approach, philosophy behind lean at any particular company sets the tone for so many other puzzle pieces that fall within, that it's less about the lean management movement and it's more about the journey at X, Y, or Z company.
Yeah. And there was a second part of Josh's question. And again, we'll link to this post if people want to go read other people's comments and chime in on their own. But he added, there's more of a statement than a question. Josh added at the end of his question, what's the current state of the lean management movement? It seems to me that as the lean community spreads from generation to generation and industry to industry, the knowledge and practice of critical fundamentals, such as observing, analyzing, and improving the work, is being lost. And I agree with that very strongly. I mean, there's a good chunk of my book, Lean Hospitals, is about process observation, observing work, observing patients, observing, understanding, so that we can improve. And, if we were doing lean pet peeves this episode, I guess I'm going there. One of my pet peeves is seeing pictures online, and maybe it's hard to take pictures in healthcare settings. But so often I see pictures that illustrate going to the Gemba as people standing and staring at bulletin boards or whiteboards. And I think sometimes, I've been in environments where I think I'm not overreacting to the pictures, but people are literally never going and observing the work. They're just going and looking at charts and things that are sort of a distillation of the work. Say I brought it back to whiskey again, inadvertently. So I'm off my soapbox, sorry.
Well, yeah, so I think that's a really good example, as people saying, well, I'm not sitting in my office waiting for a report to be emailed. I'm going to the work area and looking at their team board and looking at I'm looking at the same data. And so it's like, it feels like going to the Gemba. It feels like direct observation. I'm closer to the work, but I'm still not at the work.
It's Gemba-ish, if you will.
It's ish, yes. It's direct observation-ish. And so I think that's dead on, is we definitely should not call that Gemba or direct observation. That has to be of the work itself.
Yeah.
And, I'd have to say, my agreeing or disagreeing with this is that we don't do nearly enough direct observation. We draw way too many assumptions. We use the data without digging past it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like that was ever really well done, broadly speaking. Right, at lots of specific companies, it was masterfully done. But if you go look at all the companies, it wasn't done nearly enough. So to me, I guess I don't feel it's being lost as much as it hasn't been well established yet, because it is a tough habit to develop. And this is where I think actually talking about lean management versus lean leadership is pretty helpful, because leadership is about the people, right? Leadership is anything from giving a speech to coaching somebody to being a good example, et cetera. Lean management is about the work environment, the system that you're in, right? So how do we, design, manage, and improve the work itself, right? That is a lot of what management should spend their time doing. And I want to say it has nothing to do with people, because that's not true. But the work of designing, managing work, that is management stuff. And I don't think we've gone deep enough into turning that into habit, turning that into system. So I would agree with that statement. I'm just not sure I agree with is being lost part, because I'm not sure it was ever deeply established across many lean journeys.
Yeah. So thanks to Josh Howell for his thought-provoking post over there at LAI. So as we start to wrap up here, Jamie had suggested a good question. We've talked before about what's a non-lean podcast that you really like. The question here, what's a non-lean book that you really like? You want to go first, Jamie?
Yeah. So I still don't get enough book reading done that I used to, and I beat myself up for that. But over the past couple of years, there's a couple books that I've read that are both pretty darn long. I don't remember exactly how long, but they're pretty thorough biographies, both by the same author. And I like the author so much, I just looked up what else he's written and said, I'm going to go read something else. And both books I enjoy. They're same generation. One is The House of Morgan, and it's not just about J.P. Morgan, but his predecessors and his successors, and how that entire system was built from the very early days. Very detailed history, both of style and fact and historical context. Right, was a huge part of what goes on there. And then following that is the book Titan, about John D. Rockefeller. And John D. Rockefeller has been vilified for a lot of reasons, and many of them are perfectly justifiable. But if you look at really the bulk of his history, he was just a guy trying to run a good business, and he just did it better.
Yeah.
It goes back to his childhood and how he's brought up and the impact of his father and all these things. And they're just fascinating stories in really, I think, one of my favorite time periods in at least this country's history. And the author does a fantastic job of capturing emotion and context, historical context and situational context. They were just tremendous enjoyable reads.
Yeah. They sound like kind of like the 800-page hardcover books.
I think Titan was 1,000 pages. They were both pretty big to get through, which is why I maybe haven't read as many books as I'd like to. But I just kept going back to it. I didn't want to pick up other books because I won't say they were page turners, but I was just thoroughly invested in the story that he was telling.
Are you reading these in paper or format?
Those I both read on Kindle.
Yeah.
Just with my travel, I don't think carrying a 1,000-page book fits in my bag very well. So those have both been on Kindle, which made it probably more likely that I got through them.
Yeah. Well, so I generally, it's not just generally. Like I just do not read novels. If I'm looking for entertainment, I'm going to watch TV or a movie. But I do read a lot of nonfiction, and one that I considered a page turner, it's almost too crazy to make up, was the book Bad Blood about Theranos. That was a book that I think I tore through in like 2.5 days. I got drawn into that, and I was like staying up later than I should have, and I would think I was working from home one day, and I was reading the book instead of doing work I should have really been doing. Do you know have you read that or seen some of the different programs about the Theranos story?
Yeah, I haven't read the book. I've listened to a podcast series. I forget the name of it. That tried to capture a lot of it, and then in a couple weeks they're doing a viewing of a special documentary on it that I'll see at the National Association of Corporate Directors conference. That's 2 weekends from today. So I'll see a little more about it there. But it is a fascinating story and one that's not even done being written.
Yeah, Holmes is still awaiting trial. So
right.
We shall see. But I mean, part of the story is a governance story, which in your circles and at that conference, that's a very important issue for people to look at, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then another author I really like, and I heard a podcast of him being interviewed not too long ago, Michael Lewis, who he wrote a whole series of books. And for being nonfiction books, they have a habit of being turned into movies. Moneyball was a book that I read, and then the movie came out. I'm like, oh, okay, well, the book was better, but the movie was good. Another one that was in that page turner category, though, was The Big Short, about the housing, mortgage derivatives, financial crisis. There were times I stopped reading that book because I was just so annoyed and angry about, I was like, I just can't read any more of this. But that was also turned into a surprisingly engaging movie as well.
Yeah. So Moneyball, I read the book, but never saw the movie. Big Short, I haven't read the book, but I did see the movie. And I agree with, the idea that you have to put it down because you even though the history is already done, there are moments where you want to reach through the screen or through the pages and, whack somebody on the head and say, hey, pay attention here. This is real stuff. But it shows how much, we all learn in economics of the idea of the rational actor. And we learned how much of true economics is not the rational actor. And The Big Short captures some of that very, very well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we're a little bit over an hour. I've been focusing on my Garrison Brothers Balmorhea. Are you still savoring yours?
I am still savoring, although I've got about a sip left. So
2 ounces in that bottle. So that's a good size pour.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
We're going to have to trade some other whiskeys, and I'm sure we'll do some other lean whiskey discussions. So as always, I want to thank everyone for listening. To find the podcast, one way to go find it, if this is your first time listening, through either of our blogs, or if you want to go find the series, one way you can do that is www.leanwhiskey.com. You can spell whiskey Key, like the bourbon people and Americans generally do, or you can spell it with a KY at the end, as the Canadians and the Scots and sometimes the Japanese spell it. So either of those will forward to my page, leanblog.org/leanwhiskey. You can also find it if you prefer Jamie's blog. What's the address?
jflinch.com/leanwhiskey.
So thank you everyone for listening. If you're already subscribed, or you can do so through, if you're not, you can do so through Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher. There are probably other services that have picked up the RSS feed. You can also subscribe old school if you want to tap into the RSS feed and do whatever you want with that.
Yeah, and we really do appreciate people that rate us, review us, subscribe to the podcast, forward it to others. Or we don't make money doing this. This is just for fun and for sharing and engaging the community. But it's always more fun as the community grows. So we encourage you to share this podcast with others as well.
And as we continue the podcast, Jamie, do we need to do a spreadsheet?
Well, we are going to have to do a spreadsheet, probably how long each podcast and how many pours we do. I
was thinking about a spreadsheet of issues and things that we need to improve in our podcast relationship.
That's probably more practical than how many pours we have, but I still like my idea.
Yeah, we'll have to do that too. So we'll be back again with other episodes and other topics and other whiskeys to share and share and sample. That's not the whiskey talking. That's just me being tired on a Sunday night.
Well, either way, to our listeners and to each other, cheers.
Cheers. I guess I've got 2 glasses. All right. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.